Among the blood-stained pages of the Roman Empire's history, there are few stories that capture the cruelty and desperation of humanity as effectively as that of Sporus. This is the story of a beautiful young boy whose fate became intertwined with that of Nero, one of history's most notorious emperors. This is not merely a tale of political intrigue or military conquest. It is a disturbing examination of how power can completely erase a person's humanity, leaving behind only a grotesque spectacle of imperial whims. The tragedy of Sporus unfolds like a nightmare in the marble halls of ancient Rome, where the line between love and obsession, honor and humiliation, completely dissolves under Nero's insane gaze. The year was 65 AD, and the Roman Empire stretched from Britannia to the Euphrates. Under the rule of Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, his power seemed limitless. Yet within the lavish walls of Nero's golden house, the Domus Aurea, a darkness was festering that would soon consume an innocent young life. The emperor, in his late 20s, had already shocked Roman society with his theatrical performances, architectural excesses, and volatile relationships with those closest to him. Rome itself still bore the scars of the Great Fire of 64 AD, and whispers of the emperor's madness echoed through the streets, like smoke from the still smoldering ruins. In this world of extreme luxury and random cruelty, the young Sporus lived as a freedman in the imperial household. While this status technically granted him freedom, it offered little protection against the whims of absolute power. Historical records describe him as having an almost ethereal beauty, delicate features, and graceful demeanor. These qualities would become both his distinction and his doom. This young boy attracted the attention of the imperial court not through his own ambition, but simply by existing in a world where beauty could become a source of pain. The catalyst for Sporus's tragic transformation was the death of a woman, Poppaea Sabina, Nero's second wife, and the great love of his tumultuous life. Died in 65 AD under mysterious circumstances. Some ancient sources suggest Nero killed her in a fit of rage by kicking her while she was pregnant, while other accounts point to complications during childbirth. Whatever the truth, Poppaea's death devastated Nero. His grief would soon twist into something far more sinister. The emperor's mourning became an obsession as he desperately sought a way to resurrect or replace the woman he claimed to love more than anything. It was during this period of imperial mourning that fate brought Sporus into Nero's view. The young freedman, whether by chance or design, was noticed by the emperor. Nero perceived a striking resemblance to his deceased wife. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio and Suetonius record that Nero became fixated on this likeness. In Sporus's delicate features, he saw an opportunity to somehow reclaim what death had stolen from him. The emperor's grief-stricken and perverted mind began to concoct a plan so audacious and horrific that it would shock even the jaded sensibilities of imperial Rome. When the decision came, it was swift and irreversible. Nero ordered the castration of Sporus, a permanent alteration of the young man's body to better serve the emperor's twisted vision. This was not merely a physical mutilation, but a complete erasure of Sporus's identity as a male, transforming him into something that existed solely for Nero's psychological comfort. The castration was likely performed by imperial physicians in the sterile luxury of the palace's medical quarters, where screams could be muffled by marble walls and the boy's protests could be dismissed as the inconsequential complaints of a mere possession. Following the mutilation, Nero's plan revealed its full horror. The emperor announced his intention to marry the traumatized young man in a public ceremony, treating him as a replacement for the beloved Poppaea. This was no marriage in the sense the Romans understood. It was a grotesque parody that violated every social, religious, and legal tradition of the empire. Sporus was given a new name, Sabina, after the deceased empress. He was dressed in the finest women's garments, adorned with the jewels that once belonged to Poppaea. The imperial household was instructed to treat Sporus as an empress, addressing him with feminine titles and observing all the protocols due to the imperial consort. The wedding ceremony itself was a spectacle of imperial madness played out before the horrified eyes of Roman society. Sporus, barely recognizable in his ornate women's attire, was led through the Roman marriage rituals while the emperor played the role of a devoted groom. Ancient sources describe the ceremony as both magnificent and utterly disturbing. All the pomp and circumstance of a legitimate imperial wedding masked the fundamental horror of what was actually happening. The guests were forced to participate in the charade, offering congratulations and wedding gifts while privately recoiling at the emperor's grotesque theatricality. After this grotesque union, Sporus was displayed in Rome as Nero's empress. He was forced to accompany him to public ceremonies and events dressed in women's clothing, completely dependent on the emperor's favor and protection. The young man had no choice but to play the role assigned to him. He was paraded in theaters, at official banquets, and at private dinners, a living monument to a dead woman, treated as a cherished object. The psychological toll of being forced to live as someone else entirely, especially by the man who caused her death, was immeasurable. During these public spectacles, the Roman public witnessed a strange figure resembling a beautiful young woman by their emperor's side. Historians who knew the truth behind the image note that while the Romans were accustomed to imperial eccentricity, they found this situation deeply unsettling. The sight of Sporus in an empress's clothes, despite his delicate features and the signs of the surgical operation, was a constant reminder of how far their emperor had fallen. It was a living symbol of power's ability to not only corrupt the soul, but also distort reality itself. The relationship between Nero and Sporus, if it could be called that, was built on the emperor's obsessive possession and the young man's complete powerlessness. Nero treated Sporus as both a cherished spouse and a valuable possession, doting on him with gifts and attention while allowing him no identity or free will. Outside of his role as Poppaea's replacement, the emperor would address him by his dead wife's name, talk to him as if he were truly Poppaea, and expect him to respond accordingly. This psychological torture, the demand to constantly embody someone else, while his own identity was systematically erased, was a form of cruelty that went far beyond physical harm. Ancient sources offer glimpses into the bizarre dynamics of this forced relationship. Suetonius writes that Nero took Sporus on his trips to Greece, parading him before foreign diplomats and Greek nobility as his empress. These journeys must have been particularly agonizing for Sporus, as he had to maintain his feminine persona in foreign settings, surrounded by strangers who either believed or were forced to believe in this game. This constant performance, the inability to ever drop the mask or express his true feelings, created a prison of identity from which there was no escape. The emperor's behavior towards Sporus also revealed the depth of his own psychological imbalance. Nero's love for Poppaea had been possessive and often violent throughout her life. His relationship with her replacement, Sporus, carried the same dangerous intensity. Nero would fall into rages if Sporus failed to perfectly embody the memory of his dead wife, punishing him for flaws that existed only in Nero's broken imagination. Yet the emperor could also be tender and generous, bestowing Sporus with expensive gifts and showing him the same affection he had once shown Poppaea. This created a psychologically devastating cycle of abuse and reward. As the months passed, this strange arrangement became increasingly normalized for everyone in the imperial household. Servants and courtiers, though they knew the truth, were forced to adhere to the complex etiquette of addressing Sporus as an empress. They were witnesses to the young man's daily humiliation, the need to maintain a feminine identity, and the psychological toll it took. Some might have pitied him, others felt disgust, but all were complicit in maintaining the lie that had become the foundation of Nero's emotional stability. The strain of this existence was evident in every aspect of Sporus's daily life. He was expected to wear women's clothing at all times, speak in a manner befitting an empress, and engage in conversations and activities that reinforced his assigned identity. The surgery he underwent facilitated some aspects of this performance, but it was also a constant physical reminder of what had been taken from him. Every movement, every gesture, every word had to be carefully calculated to maintain the illusion of being the woman Nero wanted. The political consequences of Nero's actions were not lost on the Roman Senate and the wider aristocracy. The emperor's marriage to Sporus was seen as another sign of his growing instability. and his contempt for Roman traditions and values. While no one dared to openly criticize the emperor, private conversations and letters from the period reveal the shock and disgust many Romans felt. The sight of their emperor dressing up a castrated boy as his dead wife and displaying him was seen as a symbol of the moral decay that had spread to the highest echelons of government. The situation continued for several years, with Sporus trapped in his role as Nero's stand-in empress. He had no ability to escape his circumstances or express his true feelings. The psychological damage from years of forced identity erasure, the physical trauma of his castration, and the stress of maintaining a constant charade took an increasingly visible toll on the young man. Contemporary sources suggest that Sporus became increasingly withdrawn and melancholic, though he had no choice but to continue playing the role he was given. Nero's devotion to Sporus was so complete that at times he seemed to genuinely believe he had somehow brought his beloved Poppaea back to life. This delusion, if it can be called that, created moments of genuine affection between the two, but also intensified the horror of Sporus's situation. He was not just playing a part, he was expected to surrender his own identity so completely that he might even forget who he once was. The psychological complexity of this relationship, a mixture of love, obsession, cruelty, and delusion, was not easily categorized, even by the standards of an era accustomed to imperial excesses. As Nero's reign progressed, political tensions across the empire reached a breaking point. The emperor's theatrical preoccupations, his neglect of administrative duties, and his increasingly erratic behavior alienated many of his supporters and emboldened his enemies. Military commanders in various provinces began to question their loyalty to an emperor more interested in playing dress-up with a castrated boy than in governing a vast territory. The sight of Sporus in imperial attire and being treated as an empress became a symbol of everything that was wrong with Nero's leadership. In 68 AD, the political situation finally collapsed entirely. The Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and several provincial governors declared their opposition to Nero's rule, facing universal rejection and a certain painful death if captured. The emperor fled Rome with a small group of loyal supporters, including Sporus. The young man, who had initially had no say in his own fate, was now bound to a fallen emperor whose survival depended on the very man who had repeatedly proven his capacity for cruelty. The final days of Nero's reign were filled with complete chaos and terror as news of revolt and desertion reached the imperial party. The emperor's behavior became even more erratic, as he spoke of grand plans for escape on one hand and theatrical scripts for a dramatic final performance on the other. Throughout this time, Sporus remained at Nero's side, continuing to play the role of the loyal empress in his women's clothing. Even as the empire was falling apart around them, the young man must have realized that the downfall of the emperor who had ruined his life would likely mean his own end as well. With Nero's suicide in June 68 AD, assisted by his secretary Epaphroditus, Sporus was left alone in an uncertain future. The emperor's death did not bring him freedom. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new phase of his nightmare. As one of the most visible symbols of Nero's reign, Sporus had become both a living reminder of imperial excess and a potentially valuable political asset. Each of the factions vying for power after Nero's death had their own plans for the young man, who had been forced to play the role of an empress. In the immediate aftermath of Nero's death, Sporus was passed from one powerful figure to another, like a prize or a trophy rather than a person. The new emperor Galba seized Sporus along with other remnants of Nero's household. This was not a rescue or a liberation. It was another transfer where Sporus had no will of his own. The young man, once a free citizen, then a castrated plaything, had now become a symbol of conquest and political legitimacy for whoever could possess him. Under Galba's rule, Sporus's status remained precarious and humiliating, while the new emperor did not share Nero's theatrical obsessions. He saw the value in holding onto this living relic of his predecessor's reign. Sporus was kept in a form of luxurious captivity, still required to maintain some aspects of his feminine presentation, but no longer treated as a true empress. This state of in-between existence, neither fully male nor female, neither free nor enslaved, neither honored nor completely ostracized, was psychologically devastating for someone who had already endured years of identity destruction. The political instability following Nero's death, what historians refer to as the Year of the Four Emperors, meant that different factions rose and fell rapidly. When Galba was assassinated in 69 AD, Sporus found himself once again transferred to a new owner. The young man had become a kind of imperial heirloom, passing from one ruler to the next like a valuable piece of furniture or a work of art. Each transition brought new uncertainties and new humiliations, as he had to conform to the expectations and desires of each new master. Emperor Otho, who held power for a short time after Galba's assassination, reportedly treated Sporus with a relative degree of kindness. Perhaps he recognized his own precarious position in the young man's predicament. However, Otho's reign lasted only a few months, and he too was defeated and forced to commit suicide. Once again, Sporus was faced with the terrifying prospect of being possessed by a new ruler, with each transition taking a little more of the dignity and the fragments of his identity that he had managed to preserve through his ordeal. The final and most debasing phase of Sporus's predicament occurred under Emperor Vitellius. Having defeated Otho to take the throne, Vitellius apparently decided that Sporus would provide entertainment for the Roman public. The emperor planned to force the young man to appear in the arena, not as a gladiator, but as a participant in a grotesque reenactment of the rape of Persephone, a mythical scene in which a young maiden is abducted and violated. This plan represented the ultimate humiliation. Sporus would be forced to play the role of a woman being sexually assaulted for the amusement of thousands of spectators. The prospect of this final degradation was more than Sporus could bear. After years of forced feminization, identity erasure, and sexual abuse, the idea of being publicly violated as entertainment for the Roman public was apparently the final straw. Ancient sources record that Sporus chose death rather than endure this ultimate humiliation, taking his own life before Vitellius's cruel plan could be carried out. In his final act, Sporus reclaimed the one thing that had been denied to him throughout his adult life: the power to choose his own fate. Sporus's suicide marked the end of one of the most disturbing chapters in Roman imperial history. His death was neither mourned by the public nor noted as a significant political event. He had been reduced to a state so dehumanized that he was merely a minor inconvenience to Vitellius's entertainment plans. Yet, by choosing death over further degradation, Sporus displayed a courage and an honor that had been systematically denied to him throughout his life. His final act was both a rejection of the role he had been forced to play and an assertion of his fundamental humanity. The story of Sporus forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and humanity's capacity for both cruelty and survival. In a world where absolute authority could transform a free young man into a living plaything, where identity itself could be surgically and psychologically altered to serve the whims of a madman, we see a reflection of the darkest possibilities of unchecked power. Sporus's tragedy was not just personal. It was a symptom of a system that valued individuals only as long as they could serve the desires of those who held ultimate authority. The historical legacy of Sporus's story reminds us that behind the grand narratives of empires and conquests lie countless individual tragedies of lives that could not withstand the forces that shaped them. His experience sheds light on the particular vulnerability of those who lived on the fringes of Roman society: the freedmen, the slaves, and others whose lives could be randomly extinguished by the powerful. The fact that his story was recorded suggests the exceptional nature of his case. However, it also suggests that similar abuses, perhaps less dramatic but no less devastating to those who endured them, were likely common in a society built on rigid hierarchies and the absolute power of the emperor. Modern readers may question how such cruelty was possible, how society could tolerate and even celebrate such systematic dehumanization. Yet, Sporus's story also demonstrates the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, the ability to endure unimaginable suffering and still hold onto a core sense of self. His final choice, though tragic, represented a kind of triumph. He had shown that he could not be completely broken, even by powers that seemed capable of rewriting reality itself. In remembering Sporus, we honor not only the suffering he endured, but also the ultimate defiance he displayed against those who sought to erase his humanity.